Okay, chicos. This video I'm going to talk about object pronouns and how they relate to commands. Now, of course, you know that we've got affirmative commands and we've got negative commands. Now, the way object pronouns work with commands is a bit different than they work with, with other conjugations. When we say like the teacher gave me homework, that works differently, but we know the me would go before the yo. Mi profesor me dio la tarea. But when it's a command and we're saying, give me homework, we'll keep it informal for here. You know, the conjugation of give from dar is da if it's an informal command. And you're telling somebody to give it to me. If it is an affirmative command, what we have to do, sometimes we have options, but when it comes to this, we have to add the object pronoun me to the conjugation da to make it dame. So you're saying, give me, give me the homework, dame la tarea, right? Dame la tarea. Okay. When it's an affirmative command, that's how this will work. When it's a negative command, it will work differently. You're saying negative meaning, no in front of it. The to command here, the informal command of dar, the da here in the conjugation, the equivalent here to say, don't give me homework, although you guys would never say that. We have to put the object pronoun before that. It is this, is the conjugation. No me des la tarea. Okay, so this isn't a rule. This absolutely has to happen. You have to put the object pronoun before the conjugated verb this, in this case. Now, you might have heard that rule before. You put the object pronoun before the conjugated verb, but sometimes if you have an infinitive, you can put it before the conjugated verb. You can attach it to an infinitive, or if you have a present participle, you can attach it there, or before the conjugated verb. But when it comes to commands, there is no option. If it's a negative command, it's got the no in there, don't do this. The object pronoun absolutely has to go before the conjugated verb. If it's an affirmative command, do this, the object pronoun has to be attached to it. So in this sentence here, we've got la tarea. Now, la tarea can also be replaced. We could say, instead of give me the homework, we could say, let's say the la tarea was already mentioned, we could replace la tarea with the direct object pronoun la. And so if we were to rewrite this sentence, in fact, let me put a different color for each part here. So I would say da, there's our verb. I was going to write that under there. This is our verb, the mandato, the command. And then I'm going to go ahead and add our, let's do a different color. I'm going to add our indirect object pronoun, da me, which is our IOP, meaning our indirect object pronoun. And we're also, because it is an object pronoun still, they are attached. They go to the end of the word. This is all together. No spaces in between. We put the la in there, damela. And this is our direct object pronoun. So this all goes together, damela. Now, we are going to have a written accent mark here, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. I'm going to go right over to the negative command real quick, and then I'm going to come back to talk about accent marks. So over here, I'm going to go ahead and try to stick with the same format there, where I'm going to say, don't give it to me, no me la des. The object pronoun me would come first, and then la, we're going to replace la tarea like we did over here. So we're doing this essentially the same thing, but instead of give me it, we're going to say don't give it to me. And that will be with, okay, first we know it's going to be no. And then we're going to use the verb this for the negative to command of dar, as we did already above. And then we are also going to have our indirect object pronoun, no, me and la this. So it's still consistent, even though we have an extra object pronoun here. We have no me la des. We go we've got our indirect object pronoun first, our direct object pronoun second, and then the verb conjugation is after the object pronouns. This has to happen this way. When it's an affirmative command, do this, we put the verb, the object pronoun, another object pronoun if you have a second one, after the conjugation. If it is a negative command, we've got to have our object pronouns have to go before the conjugated verb. So we got this is our conjugated verb, me and la have to precede it. Now, when you are writing these, it is actually important the order in which they go. You don't get to just pick which one you want to use. You have to remember RID. R-I-D. This is for reflexive would come first. If you have multiple object pronouns in a sentence, reflexive would come first. The indirect pronoun would come second. And then the direct object pronoun would come last. So in this example, I've got the indirect and then the direct. I don't have a reflexive here. In this one, same thing, indirect first, then direct after that. So there are only, there are 2 object pronouns in each of these sentences, and it has to go in that order. You can't flip-flop them. That has to go just like this. So I'm going to go back to accent marks now. So we were already talking about, I said I'd come back to this. We showed an example of when we would use an accent mark in damela. Now the reason for using the accent mark here was because this now violated the natural rule. Remember, the natural rule in Spanish is you want to have the third from last syllable to have, or sorry, the second last syllable if you have a verb that word that ends in a vowel, an N, or an S. So really, when we're talking about commands with object pronouns, we only have to worry about vowels and S's, right? Because if you go through them, me, te, se, nos, os, and se for reflexive and indirect, or me, te, le, nos, os, les, direct, me, te, lo, la, nos, os, los, las. So all those words either end in a vowel or an S. So we can essentially just remember the rule when we have an object pronoun attached to a verb. It's always this case because that's the only option we have, is that we're going to have a word that ends in a vowel or an S. If that's the case with these commands, again, only with affirmative commands. With negative commands, we don't have to worry about it because we are not adding syllables to this verb. We're going to put them in front. So when we add syllables, then we might break the rule. Now our rule is that you have if you have a vowel or an S at the end of your word, the natural rule is to put the accent mark on the second to last syllable, or the penultimate syllable. So on this syllable is where the natural stress should be. You don't have to write it if that's the way it is. And actually in our first example of dame, we ended with an E. Second to last syllable is this syllable right here, da, which is the stressed syllable anyway. So da, me, da, me, da, me. The stress is on the da. We don't need to write an accent mark, so we don't. But when we added a third syllable now, we end with a vowel. So here's our last syllable is the la, the second to last syllable is the me. This is where it should be naturally, but it is not. And because it is not, we have to write the accent mark. So of course, I started off with a weird one. Most verbs are going to have 2 syllables to start with. I started with one that already had just 1 syllable with da. But most verbs are going to have, let's go with the formal one here. Let's go with diga. So most verbs are like this, where they have, most of them will have 2 syllables to start, meaning that this is the syllable that is stressed, di. The diga, if I'm saying, tell, diga has the stressed syllable. But if I add a, let's try to be consistent here, sort of. If I add a syllable here, diga me, now we've got a third syllable. This is still the stressed syllable. And now, since this ends in a vowel, and it is the third from the end that is stressed, then I have to write an accent mark. I have to show that there's an accent mark, or I'm sorry, the stress syllable here, because this ends in a vowel. It should be here on that second syllable, on that g, but it's not. It's on the v, and it's always going to be that way, where your syllable is not going to change. Which syllable is stressed is not going to change. Where it falls in the word, that could be different. So if I want you to tell me, tell me it, I will add a low here. Still going to have this written accent mark because now it's the fourth from last syllable that's stressed, which still is not the second to last syllable. So we have to note that with an accent mark, the written accent mark. So essentially, again, there are exceptions, as I gave you the very first one. If most verbs are going to have 2 syllables to them, or at least more than 1 syllable to them. So if you have a normal verb and you add 1 syllable to it, you are going to write an accent mark. You're going to have an accent mark. If you're adding, so if you have a verb that you're adding 1 syllable to, you're almost always going to need to have an accent mark. So the way you kind of think about it is, if I want you to eat your vegetables, I say come. Come is your verb. Now just start from the basic verb. This is most likely going to be where your stress syllable is. It's the second to last syllable. So we got come, stressed, unstressed, come. Anytime if you are going to add an object pronoun like las, come las, eat the vegetables, eat them, come las verduras, we're going to say come las. We are going to have to write an accent mark there, come las, because that violates the rule. Come, that's how it should be written without an accent mark, but add a syllable, we need to show it's the third from the last syllable. That has the stress syllable when you pronounce it, so you need to have to write that. Again, negative commands, it's not going to be relevant because you are not adding syllables to your conjugations, only with affirmative commands. Let's go over here for a second. Let's do another example. Let's say you are going to, we'll do the homework, or let's do the homework, or do some sort of activity. Aga is your conjugation if we're in a formal form. And if we're in the formal form, we are going to have to show, or this is, if we just have our normal thing about just our very beginning verb conjugation right here. It's this syllable that is stressed. We start at the end. Here's the last syllable. The syllable before it is where the stress syllable is. So when you add anything more to it, do the homework for me. Do it for me. Me la. Hágamela. We are going to write an accent mark. In fact, even if you didn't have your, let me go back. Well, I can go here. Okay, so if you didn't have just the extra object pronoun, you just have the second, just the may right here, the indirect object pronoun, you would have still a written accent mark. If this were, do it, hágala, still going to have an accent mark. Just almost always, if you just add 1 syllable, you're going to have an accent mark here on the third from last syllable once you add that object pronoun. If you add any more, it's still going to be in the same spot. So I had to erase the may in there because when we had, I want to say, do it for me. The may still has to go before the la here. So accent mark. So again, doesn't matter where you put or how many object pronouns you have, the stress syllable is always going to be in the same spot. I can show you like maybe one more way. Let's try to get rid of everything for a sec. So let's break it down a little bit. Can I show you step by step? Let's write literally write. Okay, I'm gonna tell you to write. Let's write us a letter. Okay, so we're gonna say escribe. Okay, so write. There's the command. Now I want you to, I'm gonna just go ahead and write this a couple times here. Escribe and escribe. So write. Now, if I were to break this down into syllables, I would see I've got the, I've got my last syllable is right here, the be. There's my last syllable. So this right here in the second part right here, escri, this part right here, this middle syllable is our stressed syllable. Well, this is our stressed vowel. Right here, this is where we are going to have our stressed syllable right there on that I. When I have this right here, the stressed syllable is right here. There's no need to write an accent mark there because that's where it is supposed to be. So we don't. So if the I is where the stressed syllable is, no matter what happens to this word, that is where the stressed syllable is going to be. And because here, escribe, there aren't any other syllables that follow it. It's just escribe. This is where the stressed syllable should be. This is where it is. There's no need to write an accent mark. Now, if I want you to write us a letter, I'm going to add the pronoun nos. Escríbenos una carta. Now, because this here is the stressed syllable, still always the same spot as where the syllable is stressed, but I added another syllable here, I am going to have to note that by writing an accent mark above the I. So now I know, or the reader knows, this is where you need to stress the syllable. This is where it is. It should be here because we go, this is our last, let's show this a little better. Here's our last syllable, nos. Nos is now the last syllable. Be is the second, this E here is the stressed syllable now, the stressed vowel, or it should be if it followed the natural rule. This is where it should be, right? But because it is not and it violates the natural rule, that's when we write the written accent mark. We have the accent mark here written because we have to show this is no longer the natural rule. It changes, we have to show the change in which syllable is stressed in relation to the end. Okay, so let's stick with the nos part. I'm going to say escribe nos. We're going to replace una carta here with the direct object pronoun la. Right? This is, we could replace that with la. So we're going to write it to us. I'm saying write it to us. Write us a letter. Write it to us, for next week. And I'm going to add another syllable. So here, this stressed I was the third from last syllable. Here, the stressed I is going to be the fourth from last syllable, but it is still a stressed syllable. So we still have to put an accent mark on it because it still is not the second to last syllable. If it's not the second to last syllable, we have to show that that is another syllable besides the second to last syllable has the stressed syllable. So in order to show that, we have to write an accent mark. It is really important that you do this the right way. Accent marks serve many purposes. When it comes to the object pronouns with commands, I know I'm probably making it more complicated than it has to be, but it's most of the time, whatever the second syllable is, that is where it's going to maintain. Whatever stressed syllable is in the root verb, that's where it will stay. When you add syllables, you have to put an accent mark though on the letter where that syllable, where the stressed syllable originated. So, escribe, escribe, nos. You can hear it. Escribe, escribe, nos, escribe, nos, la. Of course, you're not going to pause in between. It's all one word. Escríbenos, escríbenos una carta, escríbenos. But you hear it. This is where it's stressed. That's why you have to write the accent mark. Escríbenos la. we have a stress syllable here, we have to show that with the written accent mark. So again, as I was saying, it is important that you get these down because there's just a major consistency that we have to maintain in Spanish for these to count, or for these to be, to keep these as real rules. If we, stop doing that, then we turn into English in Spanish. We don't want Spanish to turn into English with all these exceptions. We've got plenty of irregular verbs to worry about, but when it comes to, these types of rules and spelling and pronunciation, Spanish is beautiful. It maintains, and we got to make sure we do our part and keep the accent marks where they're supposed to be, write them the right way. All right. I'm sure this was confusing. Maybe one of these days, if there's interest, I'll do a follow-up video about, more rules about accent marks. But this one was just really only relevant to accent marks with commands.